Standing up in McKinney, this is According to Callus. Coming to you on the 16th of April, 2024, the year of our Lord 2024. And it is a Tuesday, which means it's a Texas Tuesday. Only we're not going to necessarily be talking specifically about Texas. We're going to be speaking about hypothetical stuff. You see, I have to finish out or make up for my Civil War week that got blown up by events largely beyond my control. So we're drifting into episode 620 here. Before we get to the subject of the day, let me remind you, the best way you can continue to help me make a difference, grow the show, get our voice heard, impact the world around us, right, is to like, share, and subscribe to this program. Following helps. Sharing helps. Subscribing is huge. Tagging. Everything matters. The social media algorithms are not super helpful to folks right of center, especially if you're not already a well-known big name, which I am not. What I am is more or less a tireless crusader for liberty in North Texas. As you are well aware, I like to spend most of my time dealing with issues that are in Collin County, Texas, only because that's my home, and we don't have local radio anymore. And the local talk show hosts spend most of their time talking about national issues. Now, I realize that pigeonholes me, that limits me, that takes away some of the traction I might otherwise get. But even things that happen internationally and nationally do affect local things. So that's why we spend some time talking about those with the eye to how does this affect us here in Texas, here in Collin County, here in McKinney. And to that end, sometimes we upset the censors. What kind of strange clown world do we live in that they censor speech all the while screaming about how free speech is paramount? With that, without further ado, let us transition into the program today. On today's Texas Tuesday, we're going to talk mostly about the movie Civil War and the implications that it has for all of us. So first, let me start by saying as I finally got around to sitting through and watching the whole thing, I got on the big screen, right? And I plan on watching it a second time, probably when it's on a less expensive screen, and I'll now be able to pick on some of the nuances and some of the things that you miss on the first watch, right? The first watch is kind of the wow watch, and the second watch is, okay, what are the other messages here? You know, what is the filmmaker trying to get across? So you'll forgive me if I gloss over them or I don't pick out your favorite thing or least favorite thing, but just want to do a basic overview, talk about some of the implications and what does it mean, and honestly, how do we avoid this fate? Okay, so first things first, I'm not going to rate the movie. I mean, I've watched a number of reviews, and pretty much the consensus is this is a B+, A- movie. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but here is the proviso, right? If you're looking for a really intense war movie, something like Saving Private Ryan, intensity, yeah, it's probably not your movie. If you're looking for the road film that some people have referred to it as, yeah, definitely not your film. Now, if you are looking for a character study that is in the form of a road trip in the backdrop of a civil war, I think you might have just found your film. Now, I'm not a film critic. Quite frankly, a lot of that stuff doesn't impress me insofar as it doesn't strike me as being all that awesome. I'm sure it is, the people that actually know what it is and can tell. I did like some of the stop motion stuff that they did, right? The technique of, stopping and imposing a picture over a live screen in the gray out. I've seen that before. Nothing new or earth shattering here, but I did like it. I did like the dropping a sound from time to time. It's really did a good job of grabbing your attention. And again, I'm not sure what all the technique is. If you want to know about all that, I'm not your guy. But what I am going to talk about is the movie makes it extremely clear that it's trying to be apolitical. I mean, it's not. It's not entirely apolitical, but by and large, it avoids any of the major triggers. It avoids any of the major dividing points. It doesn't even necessarily look to take a side, but it does. But it's not cheering for it, if you will. There are things that, under the context of a war, civil or otherwise, make sense, though they're horrifying to somebody that doesn't know or doesn't have any context to what happens in wartime. There are what appears to be atrocities. It's not clear that that's what in fact happened, but it's implied that it may very well have been. It tries to avoid picking sides. And the irony of teaming up California and Texas, not lost on me. And some have said that it was done on purpose to take away some of the political sting. I saw one person in the comments say, well, if you look at this like you would a comic book, i.e., it's not the world you live in. It's a alternate world or an alternate universe or whatever. And if you choose to look at it through that lens, it makes a whole lot more sense. And I think that's a good way to look at it. If you just check your Orange Man bad or MAGA rules at the door, if you just check the Uber right, Uber left stuff at the door, and you just watch the movie and what's playing out, I think you'll be surprised at how it plays out. It even did a lot to avoid what would have seemed to be the obvious racial tension that everybody imputes in everything having to do with Civil War, anything. And while it doesn't do its usual, there were tropes, I'm not going to argue that, but it doesn't do the usual tired tropes that are the anti-trope. So that being said, it was not entirely predictable. It was a somewhat well-known story, when you look back after the fact. And once you hear or see some of the things, okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. And now I see it a little bit differently. So now that I've seen the end of the movie, some of the things that happened earlier in the movie make sense. And it lays it out. But for me personally, the biggest thing was there was at least 2, if not 3, interactions where there's battle going on, and it's not about who is right or wrong. It's not about this political thing or that political thing. It's not about taking this location or holding this line. It's just they're trying to kill me, and I'm trying to kill them. I mean, that's the simplest, basest thing that any war or any battle triggers on, right? This is what's going on. It's him or me, or it's her or her. It's, there's a reason why historically men have gone to battle. There's a reason why most militaries are predominantly men, because it's not a pleasant experience. It wrecks people. Men, for whatever reason, tend to handle some of that better, but only if in the proper, let's say, down cycle. It's never a good thing. It's never a positive. And for me, that was the kind of the takeaway, because, and I don't want to give any spoilers, and I want to first off say that I saw the Timcast review on this before I saw the movie, and I think Tim adequately described that, hey, those Boogaloo guys, right? I'm familiar with who they are. I don't, that's not my thing, but they actually come off pretty good. They weren't painted in a terrible light. And it's true. That's kind of what I thought. It was kind of funny. and they were fighting against soldiers. And that's the other thing. Most all the soldiers are wearing camouflage. And it's not until towards the end of the movie that you actually see any markings to see who they are and what government, if you will, that they're working for. That was very interesting. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I wish everybody would keep in mind. You don't know what happens if we go down this path. And your friend can be your enemy tomorrow. And I'm not talking about your best friend, people you spend time with. I'm just somebody that you see in passing that's your friend or your neighbor, perhaps a better way, an acquaintance maybe, becomes your enemy tomorrow. Because of what? I don't know. A divided line, a political candidate, a choice that somebody else made 1,000 miles away. So the other thing that I took away from it is they didn't spend a whole lot of time setting up how did it get to be where they're at. It doesn't give all the details. It doesn't say why this person's the president. It doesn't say why the states had enough. It doesn't. And I think, again, honestly, that plays to the strength, because to a certain point, it doesn't matter. And once it starts, it's not going to matter to the vast majority of the people involved. It's very interesting. And they talk about the pockets of isolation, people that just are acting like nothing's happening or pretending nothing's happening. And I think in a larger context, that's what most of these United States that were around during our own Civil War, the original one, if you will, in the 1860s, they had checked out, especially the people way out west, right? This is a problem for the cities. This is a problem, for the border area where, it became a problem much later on for Mississippi and Georgia specifically. It didn't talk about ideology at all. It talks about the Western forces. It talks about the Western forces comprised of Texas and California, which are both their independent republics. Again, and I think it's purposely vague. And then, of course, there's the Southern Alliance. Again, completely vague. I guess in the context of the movie, they're led by Florida, maybe. I don't know. Maybe South Carolina again. I don't know. To me, it's just giving you enough to see that there's sides fighting against each other, and this is what happens. This is how it gets torn apart. This is what destroys and implodes it. So before I go into that, in some ways, I think the movie was imitating reality, or at least history. And hear me now, I'm not suggesting that the movie cheers for this outcome. I'm not suggesting that the movie's even taking a side. I think the context of the movie is, this is this terrible event. We're going to put some people in the middle of it, and you're going to see how they interact and what happens. So, and some of the outcomes didn't see coming off the top of my head, but again, makes sense in the larger context. And at least one guy gets to be the hero for a couple of minutes. So, that was nice. Again, there's some things that were minor tropes, but there was not any obvious overt, the subverting of expectations going on. Look, again, I don't spend a lot of time on this. This isn't my deal. I don't want to dwell on it. But as far as movies go, I was pleased with it. It was well worth my money. I will go see it again, so that I can take in more of what I obviously missed in the first go-round. That's a common thing, right? You're so busy wowed. And again, I've talked about that. All right. The other thing that I want to pass along is what this movie means, or what the message is going to be largely dependent upon what you already think. Your preconceived notions, where you're coming from, how you're going to approach it. What do you want to see? I saw somebody refer to it as a Rorschach test. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I would say that if you're going in looking for a polemic on one way or one version or another of how to run a country, you're not going to find it there. If you're going in looking for a dystopian nightmare, I guess in part it's there. If you're going in, like I already talked about the war movie and the road trip, so I think I've covered that. It's what are you going to take out of it is based upon what you want to take out of it. If I went into it looking to be slighted at every little interaction that happened, well, I probably could be. If I went in looking for the worst examples of one thing or another, I'm sure I could find them. But I tried to go in with it, neutral eyes, neutral mind, just go in and enjoy the movie for what it was. I think I pulled it off. I didn't see anything stunning. I'm sure there were little jabs and subversive things going on in the background that maybe I didn't pick up on. But it didn't ruin the movie. It wasn't overt. It's not in your face. And look, every filmmaker does this. It's kind of expected. So don't be upset. Just understand that that's the deal. Now, what's the major thing here I want you to get, right? So I've talked about the Western forces are vaguely explained. The Southern or the Florida Alliance is vaguely explained. There's really no overt political ideology being promoted per se. I've talked about kind of imitating or playing off of, to some degree, real life circumstances. I think the one thing that I will point out from the Timcast is they basically said the president's Trump. And it definitely has some Trumpian attributes. I don't know if that's a fair thing to say, but they're trying to create that trope. So I actually don't have an issue with it insofar as the movie's made by liberals, right? They're generally progressives that make movies. So the fact that they even attempted to soft pedal any of this is kudos to them. The fact that they weren't in your face annoying about it is kudos to them. So I'm not offended or bent out of shape that the president's Trumpian. I mean, I almost took it as a wink and a nod, you know. We all make movies and we all hate this guy, even though, 10 years ago we all loved him, but now we hate him. It's silly. It's silly. But, okay. So the larger context and the thing that I think bears my major takeaway, the thing I want you to go into the movie, enjoy it for what it is, enjoy it for what you want to put as your take on it. But I would really, really request that at the end of the movie, you think to yourself, whatever they're fighting over or whatever they're fighting about, was it worth the consequences? Do we really want to make those sacrifices? Do we really want to destroy a country over what? Now, there are those that would like to rewrite the 1860s to make it all about, bringing freedom to those in bondage. I'm sorry, that's bunk. It's not true. It's a lie. Was it a major motivating factor for secession? Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. I get that. I'm not going to argue that point. And if you want to say after the fact, after you've retconned what happened to get us into a civil war the first time, and that's your justification, I'll grant you that justification as long as you're willing to then go back and consider what happened during Reconstruction. Was that justified? Did that bring about a proper ends? Did we actually come out better on the other side? That's what you need to be willing to look at. I'm willing to, for the purposes of the discussion, give you a free pass on your view of the Civil War and it was justified and necessary, as long as you're willing to discuss what happened during Reconstruction and was it necessary and what abuses did occur, what could have, should have been done differently. Because I think really, in my opinion, from what I know, and again, this was not my primary area of study when I went through history, but I'm very aware of it. I mean, every 2-semester class on history, we started on Reconstruction. And of course, in the North, in Yankee Land, they painted in the best possible light. Much like we paint our occupation of Germany after the war, which is not the same thing, mind you, but we paint that in the best possible light. We did awful, terrible things to a civilian population there that was largely not in control of what happened in their name. Likewise, what happened during Reconstruction was the same thing, only worse, because it was done by our own people against their own people. At least at that time, they could say, well, I'm a Tennessean, or I'm a Alabaman, or a Mississippian, right? Or I'm a Wisconsinite, or I'm an Illini. I'm an Ohioan. I don't know what the proper term is there, but people had that mindset back then. Some of that's lost now, I'll give you that, except for maybe in Texas. What thing could possibly be worth the utter destruction of the unity, even if it's fake, exaggerated, and cobbled together unity that we currently have in these United States? I would submit to you that perhaps completely abdicating, or I'm sorry, I'm trying to think how that, I know what word I want to say, I just can't spit the word out. If you completely ignore and obsolete or make obsolete the Bill of Rights, is that enough? Does that get us over the line? I would submit to you we've already really done that. And it's only because the people are long suffering and the people are willing to tolerate a heap of abuse as long as it's slowly put upon them that we haven't had a second civil war, that we haven't had significant secession movements all over this country. Because they've been very slow about how they incrementally increase the temperature and the pressure on all of us. And again, I want to be very careful here and be clear that I am not advocating violence. I don't think anybody should do the first thing or should tip this off or go seek violence or seek retribution by doing anything that you can't ever take back. But there is a way. There is a way forward. Short of secession even, there is a way. If the states will just assert their sovereignty. If the states will just push back. If we'll just say, yeah, that's fine, but we didn't give you that authority and we don't recognize it. There are so many ways we can solve these problems so we never ever see this dystopian future. Now, again, it's an interesting movie. It's an interesting what-if concept, but it doesn't give you the building blocks of how did they come about. It just takes you, drops you in a period of time that honestly, they could have made it about Bosnia. They could have made it about, I don't know, post-World War I Russia. They could have made it about, I don't know, any civil war really, or the fall of Romania, right? All these different things. And one of the things that the character states in there is these guys, these dictators, they always end up paying the price. But really and truly, the people that pay the price are we the people. We that make up the nation. We are the ones that pay the ultimate price. The long-term consequences of what we do to ourselves and what we allow to be done in our name. So while we advocate that we shouldn't be in a war over there, we shouldn't be funding wars over here, we shouldn't be propping up some little tin pot dictator that's fighting another dictator over in Europe. There's nothing to be gained for that. And whether you love Israel or hate Israel, I'm sure we're not helping settle that issue down when we're constantly antagonizing some of the other states in that Middle Eastern region. Think about it. Our nation right now, well, first of all, is multiple nations. Second of all, has been entirely destabilized from the outside. Now the inside, and our very leadership of our nation is, let's call it, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I want to be very careful how I say this. Spotty at best. We're just going to use that term. Spotty at best. I don't know that we can depend on Dementia Joe to show up for work tomorrow. I don't know that Sleepy Creepy Joe is capable of running a re-election that is believable. I don't know that Kamala should be even anywhere in DC, but that's what it is. And you can hate on the Orange Man all you want, but given my options, I'll take Donald all day long. And even though the movie kind of pokes fun at the idea of it, there was a Trumpian person, okay, fine, but the Donald was none of that. The Donald talks a big game, carried a decent-sized stick, but at the end of the day, when it was done, it was done. He walked away. What I'm suggesting to you is, rather than go headlong into the abyss of civil war, perhaps we ought to be looking for an opportunity to walk away. Perhaps we ought to consider, I don't know, just using the federalism that Brian McClanahan talks about ad infinitum, use the Constitution that Chris Ann Hall talks about ad infinitum, and use the tools that we already have to prevent this outcome. If Texas really truly wants to be free and independent nation, it can and should be able to go that direction. My fear is they've destroyed the culture of independence that existed in Texas, and what's left is a mere shadow of what it once was. And whether you want to blame that on 50 years of indoctrination from the school districts, whether you want to blame it on the fact that they kicked out God from the classroom, whether you want to blame it on the fact that we've been killing babies for 60 years, or is it? Yeah. I can't answer that for you, but what I can tell you is all of those can be dealt with at the state level right here in Texas. If we just had leaders with courage, leaders that would stand up and do the right thing, leaders that would push back, hold the line, perhaps we could avoid this dystopian outcome. Perhaps we could avoid a shooting war over politics. Now, I value liberty as much or more than most people. I value the ability to speak my mind and to come home and spend time with my family and do certain things being unmolested by government agents. And I'm speaking metaphorically there. But it comes to a certain time where it becomes almost completely unavoidable. When are we going to start to dial back these things? When are we going to start to consider that sometimes with liberty, with freedom, comes a little danger, comes a little, I don't know, situations that are beyond your control? Are you willing to sacrifice that liberty for the false security? Do you really think you're going to live in a better country, a better state, a better county, a better city if we institute a full police state and monitor everything and anything that happens? Do you think that outcome is going to be worth it? If you do, please check out New England or California. They have a place waiting for you. I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to fight you. I'm just going to ask you to go somewhere where you'll be more comfortable. Here in Texas, the vast majority of us still don't believe that. We cherish each other's right to do what they want to do to a point. We also cherish the idea that people ought to be left alone. There are people out there that want to do things that I'm diametrically opposed to that don't hurt other people. I'm not going to lose sleep over the fact that they do them. I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to try and convince them that's a bad idea. But at the end of the day, I don't want to throw them in jail. Most of the time, I don't even want to banish them. But that is an option, right? Texas wants to be a sovereign, independent nation again. We'll just banish people. Well, I'm sorry. We don't tolerate that here in Texas. But you can feel free to go over to New Mexico or perhaps Colorado. If you don't like that, may I suggest Nevada or California? Oh, that's too high and dry for you? Well, I understand Louisiana is still letting your folks go there. Draw your own conclusions. I'm being vague on purpose because there's any number of things that somebody can pick on or get upset about. Myself, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I just want to be able to go to work, make enough money to take care of my family, look after my family at home, be involved in my church and in my community, and enjoy life. And I feel like every year that goes by, that becomes harder and harder to do. And every year that goes by, I spend more and more time pushing back and trying to hold the line in political meetings that at the end of the day don't pay the bills. They don't protect my marriage. They don't look after my family. But I have no other choice, because if I don't do it, nobody will. And if nobody does it, then I've got another boot on my neck. So I'm asking you out there, dear listeners, whether you agree with everything I say or don't say, whether we're, blood brothers or not, find your stuff, find your issue, get involved, do something now, push back while we still can. Bring up that discourse, have the arguments, have the discussions, ferret out what you think and why it's important to you. Talk to your family, get involved, pay attention, do something. My friend Kyle says be vigilant. And I know he means that in more ways than one. When I hear vigilant, I only hear the echo of Franklin, if you can keep it. I cherish my republic. I gave an oath to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It has no expiration. But the last thing I want to ever do is have to take up arms against my fellow Texian, Tejano brethren, the boys up in Oklahoma. I don't want to ever see that for any of us. And the best way we can prevent that, the best way that we can understand that is, hey, go take a 2-hour night, watch the movie. If you want to watch 6 or 8 other movies that are along the same vein, fine. But look at it and consider it through the lens. There, but by the grace of God, go we. We may very well end up in a situation just like that. And how will we be able to live with it if we didn't do what we could do now to prevent it? And with that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.